Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences. Our guest today is Alice Barker, Director of Engineering at Thesis. Alice, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. And I guess to kick things off, Alice, could you please share with our listeners a bit more about your journey in the tech industry, maybe highlighting some significant milestones from your impressive career.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, I have worked across so many industries at this point. Really diverse ones, everything from the banking world to the adult industry to running a creative agency in Los Angeles to working at, well-funded startups. And I landed in the nonprofit world for a little while. And now I'm at Thesis, which is an accelerator. We build all kinds of companies. So I've had a chance to work with some really talented folks all over the world throughout my career. So I've actually mostly done remote management and building of teams and remote work since day one. So super familiar with the platform and the concept. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So maybe let's dive into Thesis, right? From what I gather, Thesis is a crypto venture studio with a mission to empower individuals in the cryptocurrency and digitalized space, right? So could you maybe give us a deeper insights into the company's business model, projects, and your role in this company?
Sure, absolutely. Just for legal purposes, I want to say that I speak for myself and not necessarily for Thesis. My opinions in this regard. But um, uh, Thesis is a wonderful place. It basically we do a lot of crypto based ventures, but we also do non crypto space stuff too. Right now, we're working on a period tracking app that's privacy first. That's a really cool project. So we basically fund and build creative and financial products that are geared towards public good, essentially, in one way or another. And We work with folks all over the world. A significant amount of our team is based in Poland. But we have folks across the U.S. And across Europe and in South America as well. We have a really diverse team, and it's been amazing getting to work with people from sort of all walks of life. And yeah, we really focus strongly on an asynchronous culture. So that's one where documentation is super important because everybody's on a different time zone. We want to make sure that we don't lose anything in terms of communication. So yeah, that pretty much sums it up, I hope.
Okay. And speaking about culture, right, and remote work, this is a fully remote company, global first company, right?
Correct.
Could you share some insights into how Thesis has built and maintained a global first culture within the company?
Totally. So I think one primary thing that I really like to focus on in hiring is obviously not to lead with a preference to one country or another, to really maintain an equitable hiring process that is visible to people and folks in all countries, as well as maintain the highest level of pay we can for those individuals, regardless of the economic location and sort of situation. So I really believe strongly and I'll speak for myself, but I really believe strongly in not taking advantage of uh, quote unquote cheap labor, and making sure that folks really get paid to the highest amount that they can across the world. Meeting the standards for uh, um, the rest of the team. So I think that's a really important and impactful piece. I also think that communication and being able to communicate asynchronously is a lot more difficult than a lot of people think. Being able to convey empathy and emotion through text can be difficult. So there are a lot of strategies that we use to do that. And I think um, one of those strategies is to um, essentially make sure that you're highlighting your main points and then adding context. So not overwhelming people with a huge wall of information that they can kind of get lost in, but taking a breather and making sure that you sort of break the information down in a digestible way, um, and obviously leading with empathy and the fact that we're communicating across different cultures, across different experiences, different life experiences. So those kinds of things we really value.
That sounds good. And you mentioned that the majority of your engineering team is based in Poland, right? So with that in mind, any specific challenges you have faced and maybe overcome uh, in terms of, yeah, you mentioned communication, that's clear, but maybe any specific challenge in terms of culture or anything like that? Can you talk more about it?
I think there are some interesting differences in terms of um, I think as an American myself, Americans tend to sort of live in a bubble, I think, compared to the rest of the world in terms of almost like there's almost a thought process that, oh, our way of doing things is the only way. And uh, like this assumption that, um, you know, uh, our culture and practices are um, normal, and everyone else falls outside of the norm or something. And I think it's really important to check that, sort of perspective. And I know that for myself, I've had to do that throughout the years, especially in regards to sort of this, you could call it like a career ladder. And I think one of the sort of very like maybe like American ideals, perhaps. And I don't know if I'm. I'll speak from my own experience here, just to make sure I don't step on anyone's toes. But I
Sure.
think in my experience, there's kind of this drive to work your way up the career ladder in these different ways. And a lot of folks are actually just like, I want to come to work and I want to do a great job as an engineer. And I'm actually happy with that position. And I'm not trying to vie for, a managerial role. And I think it's important to recognize also that, there's a huge difference between managing people and, work as a principal engineer. So those paths are different and also both incredibly necessary, but very different work. And so recognizing the importance and also offering those avenues for people, I think is really important, regardless of what part of the world you're in.
And when it comes to building distributed teams, global teams, right? So, what tactics and principles have you found effective in your career, especially in the context maybe of your existing role, current role? Can you talk more about it?
Sure. Um, I think leading with empathy obviously is really important. I like to focus on hiring good communicators, people that don't just have the engineering talent, but also um, can express themselves in a way that is effective. And uh, I think in terms of management strategy, I try to build let's say like a non-brittle framework for engineering. I think there's a lot of real sticklers for certain agile processes or certain processes that really are very rigid. And I often find that each team works differently. Each team is effective in different ways of working. So I like to build a very loose framework that adapts to the team. and the way that they work together. And sometimes that manifests in interesting ways, like we communicate mostly in English at our organization, but there are drawbacks to that where an engineer might not feel entirely comfortable in a code review expressing themselves in English, right? So we need to account for that, and we need to prioritize the fact that we need to make sure that they're able to communicate in a way that's comfortable for them and they can express themselves. So we try to make accommodations for that as much as we can. So I think those are a couple pieces of strategy, I guess, that have worked for me.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And if we're talking about more maybe on tactical level, right? Could you walk us through your approach to hiring talent in different countries, right? You mentioned, yeah, you have a team in Poland, and how did you do that? How did you hire those guys? Did you hire them through agency, or you just, you know, hired some or outsourcing agency? Can you talk more?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So there's a couple different strategies that we use. We do work with recruiters, but I think the most effective way I've seen is actually through almost all of our projects are open source, which means we have a ton of contributors from all over the world. And we actually like to go and talk to those contributors who are interested in the projects on their own accord. And we're really interested also in building global community, and open source is a great way to do that. So we start there a lot of times with folks that are already contributing to the product, because a, we know they can do the work well, and b, they're passionate about what we do. So um, you know really, those are two pretty difficult things to find in a hiring process usually. So once you pass that barrier, it's really mostly about communication and culture, and that's kind of an amazing leg up, I think, in terms of being an open source organization.
And maybe you have some sort of checklist. What is your checklist for ensuring the smooth international hiring process, and what challenges have you encountered along the way?
Sure, sure. So I've been through a few different organizations at this point in my career over the past, decade, and they've each had pretty different hiring processes. But I've settled on one that's relatively simple. I think one, it's important to respect people's time, and to not have 100 meetings before before you make them an offer. But also, of course, you want quality information about how that person communicates. And so um, the essential process that we use is an initial screen where an individual or myself or someone will hop on a call, and we'll just chat a little bit about the experience that they've had, and why they might be interested in the role. Really, just almost like a vibe check, just to see what kind of communicator they are. A lot of things I look for are um, you know there are a lot of folks in the industry who kind of have this I'm the smartest person in the room kind of energy, and that's a huge red flag for us, because we really like to share information, and come to the table with we're all learning, and I think that's an attitude we look for, one of like learning and sharing knowledge as well. Um, and then we get to a coding challenge, and I actually um, have gone back and forth on a couple different methods of coding challenge. One of them has been um, sort of give me whatever you got, make something cool, leave it up to them creatively. Uh, and that's produced some pretty interesting and telling results, I think. But I also have leaned towards replicating the work. in the biggest way possible. A lot of coding challenges are, reverse this binary tree or whiteboarding sort of exercises. I remember I had an interview at eBay that was back in the day that was very much like that, and I was so turned off by the interview that I was like, never mind. But the yeah, so as close to the work as possible, I think, is critical. So that might be contribute to a feature on an open source project that we have, or um, you know, correct some code or something like that. But the really important part then afterwards is returning and communicating with them about what they did. So they run through the code with us. Um, I've added this extra step recently, which is to give feedback and then to watch how they absorb that feedback and make changes after that, which is really interesting because a lot of folks have trouble receiving feedback. So that's something we look for as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing at GoGloby as well. So we interview thousands of engineers every day, and for our clients, and basically, and I'm just curious to hear your opinion on this. One of the biggest challenge for our clients, mostly for CTO, right? They just do not want those guys to use AI, things. With those home assignment stuff. And in fact, there are two groups. On the one hand, we have those CTOs, those VP of engineering who are okay with that and just say, yeah, I mean, whatever. If it helps, let them use this AI thing, ChatGPT or whatever. And there's another group, and at this point, I guess 80% of CTOs are not really, interested in guys who are just using ChatGPT for those home assignment stuff. And I'm just curious to hear your opinion on this. What do you think about it?
As someone who has had no formal education in engineering, I actually went to school for art, for painting and sculpture. So I really just delved into it myself over the years. And one thing I feel like I learned, especially from running a creative agency, is that the real world work is about solving problems and solving them effectively. So I think whatever tools you can use to solve those problems, I think you should use if they're effective. The point to where they become ineffective for solving problems is when you can't explain why they're successful or why they're doing what they're doing, which is why the step of walking through the code and walking through the syntax and explaining what's going on is more important to me than if you wrote the code by hand or not, right? I really believe in, I felt like for so many years of my career that my job was Googling, right? Was just just looking things up, and I can't tell you how many times I've looked things up that I should know by now, like this type of algorithm, this type of function. I've probably done it 100 times, but I Google it anyway, just to refresh my memory, just to check against those things. And I think that's closer to the work than actually, doing it all yourself. And whatever that means, I think that's a false dichotomy. So yeah.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And probably my last question, as I told you, we have really a huge network of tech talent, around 10K in Latam and in Europe, and many of those guys, they're looking for this next move in terms of their career, right? So, what advice do you have for them in terms of breaking into this markets and securing positions in global companies like Thesis, for example?
Yeah. I would say, one, it's really hard out there, and um, just sending resumes to folks doesn't do it anymore. There's too much. There's too many people applying. There's too many. Just the amount of resumes one gets from posting on LinkedIn or wherever is overwhelming. And to be honest, physically, there's no way for me to look at them all. It would take too much time. We'd never hire anyone. Um, so I'd say find personal connections or use personal connections as much as possible. That's probably the quickest way in, and I know that can often be sort of a privileged position to take because a lot of folks don't have any personal connections, and but they still want to break into the scene, to the world. So, putting yourself out there in any kind of personal way that you can, in any kind of way that shows your passion and shows like who you are as a person, putting a face to the name, I think is so important and really can get your foot in the door in a big way. I also think that choosing something you're genuinely passionate about shows through a lot. Telling a story. Uh, I think telling a story is critical. It's been really important in my career to show a trajectory and to link that to a narrative in order for people to understand where you're coming from and where you hope to go. If you've just and I've bounced around to a lot of different kinds of work, a lot of different verticals, but I also have a pretty good narrative about how I went through those things and why and what led to those decisions. And I think that's really important.
Okay, I guess we're good. Thanks, Alice, for sharing your insights on international hiring, on remote first culture thesis, on the challenges and obstacles of hiring globally. Yeah. So we wish you and thesis all the best in your journey. We appreciate your time very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.